First transgender candidate regardless of electoral status. Jamie Lee Hamilton ran for Vancouver's Park Board in 1996. Kristen Malloy, an Ontario Libertarian Party candidate in 2011, was the first transgender candidate in a provincial election. Jennifer McCreath, a Strength and Democracy candidate in Avalon in the 2015 federal election, was the first transgender candidate in a federal election. My friend Trevor, was a Liberal candidate in Manitoba, I believe twice, becoming the first openly trans candidate nominated by a major party in a federal election. We're going to turn the camera around on me. Hi, everybody. I am Jennifer McCreath, and it is May 16th, 2026. And I was, scrolling through Facebook today, and one of the millions of pages I follow, I think it's called Born LGBTQ. And they asked, do you know anyone famous from your high school? So as a joke, I said, yeah, me. I was the first trans candidate to run in a federal election in Canada. And someone has reached out saying, do tell. So I will. I think it's a story worth telling. Not necessarily because I got a big ego, because I think it represents an important milestone. I think trans people just want to be seen and accepted for who they are. And when I realized I was trans, the last thing I thought I would ever do was move from Toronto, Ontario, Canada, to St. John's, Newfoundland, and Labrador, Canada. That's exactly what happened. So I didn't realize I was trans till I was in my early 30s, and I realized that transition is something I needed to do. And at the time, no government was funding any of this stuff unless you went to the Clark Institute of Psychiatry. And I decided that that was not going to happen for me. So I needed a job, a better job. I don't care where the better job was, I was going to find it. And lo and behold, I ended up coming out here, St. John's, Newfoundland, for what I thought would be 2 years. But once I got out here, I realized I'm kind of anxious to get this transition started here. And immediately I reached out to the LGB community. There wasn't really a T community here. And I was told, no, all the trans people leave. They go transition in the big cities. Nobody would want to transition here. It's kind of backward. We're behind the times and all the stories of, yeah. So I said, you know what? I think it's time for Newfoundland and Labrador to catch up with the rest of Canada. And it's time to put an end to the monopoly on the Clark Institute of Psychiatry. So I made it a mission to be very, what's the word? Out, literally. I became, I guess, the educator. I wanted to educate people, specifically in this province, what a trans person is, why we are not the stereotypes you've seen and heard about us on television. Those of you who are older may remember Jerry Springer and these crazy daytime talk shows, and the way trans people were portrayed on those TV shows was in a negative light. And I wanted to make it clear that, yes, we are different people in some ways, but we are also very much still people. And I used my novelty. An otherwise regular, boring person who happens to be trans is taking the bold step of staying in Newfoundland to transition. And that in itself became a news item in the province of Newfoundland and Labrador. And I very quickly realized that things weren't much better in PEI, Nova Scotia, and New Brunswick. So I reached out and found trans people in each province and formed what we would call the, what do we call that organization? East Coast Trans Alliance, I think it was. So yeah, the East Coast Trans Alliance became a thing. We would show up in each other's provinces. We would go to each other's pride events. We would hold educational events designed to teach people about trans issues. And we even organized some rallies and some protests to lobby government officials to change human rights and healthcare. And I think it was around 2011, I was aware of who Kristen Malloy was, and was very excited and impressed when Kristen ran in that provincial election. I never thought I would get into politics. But naturally, it was going to happen. My dad was a political candidate who got elected, and he became a federal cabinet minister. And my mom spent 40 years working as a civil servant in the provincial government. So it's not surprising that I ended up taking that risk, or that route. 2013, I decided to run municipally here in the city of St. John's. Backing up, I came here to Newfoundland for what was supposed to be a safe and secure job. Shortly after I came out as trans, that job was eliminated. Nobody came right out and said, we're getting rid of you because you're trans, but it seemed quite evident to me and quite obvious to everyone else. And I was careful about the way I told that story. And that also helped establish me as a sympathetic character, as well as someone who was bright, articulate, and talented, who can stand up in front of a TV camera and take questions from the media and know what they're talking about. So yeah, I saw an opportunity. I didn't like the way the city was running. I decided to put my name forward as a candidate for council. And everyone ridiculed me and say, oh, there's no chance in hell. You're going up against a well-known, long-term, respected candidate. But I made it clear, look, I want to prove that there's different opportunities for different people here. And if you don't like what the current city council's doing, here's an opportunity. Yeah, I'm trans, great. But guess what? I'm also educated. I went to university. I've worked in government and public policy for years. And not only do I have a great wealth of knowledge and experience about what's going on in this town, I've lived in the bigger cities. I've lived in rural Nova Scotia. I've lived in Toronto, Ontario. I've perhaps seen it all. So I didn't win a seat on city council, but I did a lot better than anyone thought I would do. And let's fast forward 2 more years. 2011, we had seen a very interesting election where the NDP had done very well. And by 2015, Canadians, for the most part, wanted to change the government. They wanted Stephen Harper out of there, supposedly. But the Liberals were considered a distant third. Jack Layton had passed on, so the NDP had a new leader, Thomas Mulcair, who people felt he wasn't really a true NDPer. And then I took a look at what was going on here locally. Just outside of the city of Newfoundland is the riding of Avalon. There had been a controversy in which the sitting member of Parliament, a Liberal, was booted out of the Liberal caucus because of accusations, I guess we'll call it sexual improprieties. So already there was a seat up for grabs. The Liberals were going to pick a new candidate. This incumbent was going to still run as an independent. A lot of hype. The NDP and the Conservatives had nobody locally. I believe they had to fly in candidates from, as we say, from the mainland. So I said, what a great opportunity to jump into this riding. And I was seriously going to run as an independent candidate. And I knew that being a novelty, sometimes nobody wants to be seen as a novelty. I'd like to think I could be seen and recognized for being more than that. But I recognize that when you say the word trans, it gets you. It's like the cover of the book. The cover is designed to get you to open the book and start reading it. And that was my goal. I want people to take note that trans people are just as keen and concerned about politics and governance public policy, it's the civil service. And I figured that being a trans candidate, the media would pay a little bit more attention than they would other independent candidates. But I sat down and I went through the list on Elections Canada. I think there were 25 registered political parties. So just for fun, I decided I would click on all their websites, read all their mission statements, and see who they were and what they stood for. And if there was a party out there that I liked, I would perhaps reach out. That's exactly what happened. Ironically, a party called Force et Démocratie, a party formed in rural Quebec by Francophones. An NDPer and a Bloc had both quit their caucuses because they felt that the parties they represented didn't care enough about rural Quebec. So they decided to create their own party. Shortly before the election was called, a NDPer had been booted out of the NDP and was decided to join Strength and Democracy, the English word for Force et Démocratie. That's another side of the story. So you got this rural Quebec party with 3 sitting members of parliament, more than the Greens had. I think the Greens had 2. They wouldn't let us into the debates, which sucked. So I reached out to them and said, you guys are onto something here. There's a lot of people, not just in rural Quebec, but rural Newfoundland, rural everywhere, that feel that the politicians don't give a damn about them. The big parties only care about the big cities. And I convinced them that they should run a candidate in Newfoundland. And I convinced them that they should run me. And they were loving the idea. So not only did I become a candidate, I became the English spokesperson for the federal party. And there was one other non-Quebecer who ran. I think we had 1 seat in Ontario, in Peterborough, Kawartha, somewhere in that neighborhood. Hi, Tobin. And me out here in rural Newfoundland. And then a bunch of Quebecers. 2, of course, were well known as sitting MPs who had just finished their 4-year term. And again, sure, I was interested in politics. But at the same time, this was an exercise in trans activism and trans education. And it worked to a certain extent. It became a bit of a news story. Rural Quebec Party is now running a candidate in rural Newfoundland. And by the way, it's a trans person. Makes for an interesting news story, wouldn't you think? That's probably, if that's on the 6 o'clock news, you're going to turn the volume up and say, what? Amazingly, the Quebec media was very excited. And I guess, as we know, Quebec has not always gotten along. There's been some challenges within the relations between Quebec and Canada. We've had, of course, referendums in which Quebec has narrowly voted not to separate. But let's just say anytime there's a new political party in Quebec, people pay attention, especially the media in Quebec. So word got around, okay, we've got this party and there's in Quebec, and they've got 3 sitting MPs looking to get re-elected under this new banner. And they're now running a trans candidate out in Newfoundland in this very controversial riding where the Liberals just kicked their sitting member out of caucus. So I was hoping that things would go beyond the, hey, look, there's a trans candidate running, to, okay, let's take a look at this party, Strength and Democracy, who they are, what they stand for. I thought legitimately it was a great idea. I spoke to the media, and of course they wanted to talk about me being the first trans candidate. But eventually the conversation would lead to, well, what are your chances and why this party? So I made it to CBC Radio As It Happens, I think it's called. Nationwide morning radio show. That's pretty cool. And all these online media companies I'd never heard of. Vice at the time. I didn't know who Vice was, but they wanted to do an interview. BuzzFeed got in touch for an interview. There's even a Quebec media company that sent 2 journalists out to Newfoundland to follow me around this riding for a full day. And they did a story on me, which I thought was really interesting. So we didn't win. Newfoundlanders were so angry with Stephen Harper that they were going to vote for the party that they felt had the best chance of defeating Stephen Harper. And that certainly was not going to be strength in democracy. I even had people sign my nomination papers. You can't even be on a federal ballot unless you get 100 signatures. I literally spent my campaign collecting those signatures, explaining who I was, explaining that I wanted to be on the ballot, and you don't even have to vote for me. I even had people say, I'm not going to vote for you, but I definitely think you deserve to be on the ballot. And it was the shocking upset. The third place Liberals with this young leader, Justin Trudeau, came out of nowhere and won the election. But you know what? It was one heck of an interesting experience. I'm glad I did it. I learned a lot about rural Newfoundland, and I learned a lot about rural Quebec, and I made some connections and some friends, and hopefully it gave me a little boost of credibility. It has not yet opened up doors for employment opportunities for me, but I think it was an important step. As we saw on that Wikipedia page, the Liberals would then start nominating trans candidates, and I believe the NDP has now run federally trans candidates as well. So I think it's only a matter of time before one of us is actually going to win a seat. And it's really exciting to be able to say I did this, and I'm very proud of it, and it'll probably be my legacy. Hopefully there'll be more. My life's not over yet, and we're just getting started. Us Gen Xers, you know, we're in our early 50s, and we still don't know what we want to do when we grow up. And we're still waiting for the baby boomers to retire so we can all get decent jobs, right? But there you have it, the story of why I decided to become Canada's first openly trans candidate to put my name on a federal ballot. Maybe I'm not necessarily famous, but definitely infamous. And to see my name on a Wikipedia article with so many other great people, it's really, really cool. So there's my story. Hopefully there'll be more stories ahead. And thanks everyone for watching.